this evening, but I really want to welcome each of you all to the conversation this evening around Real Inclusion Includes Black Men. This is our first series in what right now is going to be a three-part series. And so before we get into the objective of the program, I want to go through a few logistics with the group today. All the lines are muted, and the participant videos, you can either have them on or off. I just really want to make sure that we're minimizing distractions. So I'll allow you all to use your best judgment in what that looks like based upon where you're at. Also, I would encourage everyone to utilize the chat feature within the Zoom meeting. So we will certainly allocate time at the end for questions, but definitely want you all, as questions come up, as thoughts, definitely want you all to feel comfortable with putting in your thoughts around the topics and the information that's going to be shared this evening. We will certainly allocate about 10-15 minutes at the end for questions, and so we'll monitor the chat feature at that point. And lastly, I really want this to be a safe space for healthy, open, and honest dialogue. We definitely have a couple experts with us by way of Dr. Shepard and Richard Rowe, but we want this to be a place where people feel comfortable with asking questions. We're all learning together, and the objective is really for us to walk away from this evening with some additional insights and information, as well as to what is our personal call to action. So with that being said, I want to outline the session objective a bit, just by way of how did we come to the conversation around Real Inclusion Includes Black Men. I will tell you all, the concept was actually developed about 2 months ago, prior to the flurry of recent events that we're currently living through and managing to today. And it really was birthed out of experiences that I was beginning to hear more often by my Black male friends as it relates to challenges at work and or in the communities in which they live and work. And then when I began to think about the organizational spin and the role that organizations and workplaces play, as well as communities play in providing support to Black men, I noticed a disparity in terms of the intentional investment that most companies are honestly not making as it relates to Black men. I think about, there's a lot of room for improvement by way of other ethnicities, by gender issues, by other issues. But when you think about the spin that most companies are making, I would challenge you all to think about how much are your companies actually spending towards the development and the inclusivity of Black men into the respective communities and organizations. I haven't seen a lot of that, so I thought it was important that we began to dive into it. And so really, and then lastly, when you overlay the data for the Center for Disease Control in terms of that 2016 report that I've referenced, just by way of the percentage of trauma that Black men experience at a much higher rate than any other demographic. So when you add things going on in the workplace, things going on in the community, to what we're seeing in the media, I just felt that now is the time for us to really begin to have an open and honest dialogue around inclusion in Black men. So here we are, super excited about our first session. And tonight, again, as the invitation included, we're going to talk about understanding and supporting the mental well-being of Black men. And so I'm so excited about the guest presenters that we have with us this evening, and I will do a brief introduction. So we have Richard Rowe, who's a project consultant with the Black Mental Health Alliance in Baltimore, Maryland. So in that role, he provides strategic guidance and planning for all of the activities that BMHA provides services to. He's a trainer. He specializes in family strengthening, cultural enrichment, historic and contemporary trauma. He's also a graduate of Morgan State University and the University of Baltimore. And lastly, Richard is an author of a book that's entitled Wanted Black Fathers, Only Serious Black Men Need Apply. So I haven't read the book, but it sounds like a page turner. And then we also have Dr. Jonathan Shepard. Dr. Shepard is an award-winning mental health professional. He's been named top doctor in the field of psychiatry. He serves and provides treatments in a wide range of mental health capacities, including mood disorders, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, and many more. He's a graduate of the University of Chicago Medical School and Adult Psychiatry Program, as well as the Johns Hopkins University Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship. He's received a number of awards, and most recently he was bestowed the honor of the Fellow by the American Psychiatric Association. I guess one fun fact about Jonathan, we were talking about this before folks joined. I've known Jonathan my entire life. Like Jonathan and I, Dr. Shepherd and I grew up together. So it's a sincere pleasure to actually be able to work with him in this capacity and have this conversation this evening. So welcome to the both of you. And we're gonna get started with the conversation. I guess just to kind of tee it off, when we talk about trauma, that's a big word. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So would really love for you all to provide some insight into defining what trauma is based upon your research and data.
Well, go ahead, Jonathan. You want to, or you want me to?
Let me just give a real quick
definition.
And I think, and just for you all out there, Richard and I, we work well together. We're going to piggyback off of answers. So you may hear a straightforward answer, then he's going to give a little bit of history sometimes. Trauma. Well, first of all, thank you, Joyce. Again, pleasure being with you. So trauma is just the exposure to the actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. That's what trauma is. It is exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. That's what trauma is. And we all have experienced some form of trauma. The caveat with trauma is that not only can you witness trauma directly, but by repeated exposure to things that you see online, or even extreme exposure to that incident over and over again will cause you to experience trauma. And so when Richard and I were talking, he's going to now talk about some different types of trauma that you could experience.
Right. And also, Joyce, let me thank you again for the invitation and for bringing Jonathan and me together to participate in this very timely and critical discussion this evening. It's important to have this discussion for many reasons, and I am so glad you are doing the work that you're doing. So again, congratulations to you for all of your passion and working commitment to our community, and for having these webinars. I also, before I piggyback on what Jonathan said, let me also just thank the audience for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of the discussion tonight as well. And let me also, before I won't say I get in trouble, but I always try to do this when I'm speaking on the topic of Black men in particular, that we don't want to in any way forget that there are many Black women who have been killed by the police, and so forth. But this is a discussion about Black men this evening, but we don't want our women to ever forget that they are so important to us. And I always say, and Jonathan has heard me say this on numerous occasions, that I can't tell Black men who to love and not love. I can only tell Black women that you all have not been enough. And so I want you all to know how much we love you all. And who was our dear brother, Mr. George Floyd, calling out to when the knee was on his neck? He was calling out for his mother, because he knew that his mother was always there for him. And it's just amazing that a 42-year-old man who was losing the last breath in his body called out to her. And so mothers out there, Black mothers in particular, thank you all very much for helping to keep skies from falling. With that being said, Jonathan is right. You know, it's an incident, it could be an experience, but there are types of trauma that can include psychological abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, a loss of a parent, what else? Substance abuse, mental illness, criminal behavior, viewing some of that in the home. And there are also traumas that are individual trauma, and then there's group trauma. And so for African Americans and Black people, historically, slavery has been a form of trauma that has impacted our psychology, our worldview. Lynchings, Jim Crow laws, discrimination, concentrated poverty, all these kinds of things, neighborhoods that are not conducive for optimal growth and development, all of these can basically be called traumatic experiences. we have basically endured so many types of trauma individually and also from a group standpoint. So those are some of the types of trauma, and just wanted to provide you all with that kind of overview before we get further into our discussion this evening.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for saying that in terms of acknowledging the role that Black women play in this entire discussion as supporters and sometimes, unfortunately, victims of some of the same heinous crimes and injustices that Black men experience. Mm-hmm. I'm interested from a research and data standpoint, like statistically, you think about current events that are happening, whether it's COVID, whether it's unemployment. Jonathan, you and I talked about the Drew Brees fiasco over last week. And I'm interested in terms of highlighting the differences in terms of Black men's exposure to trauma at a higher rate than other demographics. And why is that?
Absolutely. So if you just look at the current events regarding the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, many of us have heard how Blacks were affected disproportionately than other ethnicities. Well, I should say other besides the Latinx. Those two communities were affected the most. And again, just going back and looking at some data from SAMHSA, when this unique experience was being pointed out, I took real quick note of just the state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And Michigan was hit very hard. I know a lot of people talked about New York, but Michigan was right behind New York. And Michigan only has 14% population of Blacks, but 41% of the COVID-19 deaths were Blacks. Can you imagine that? 14% of the population, 41% of the COVID-19 deaths were Black people. And then 33% of the COVID-19 cases were Black. And many of those were Black men. Now, you might say it might have to do with the comorbidities that go along with making you more susceptible to the coronavirus. And I do believe that. Obesity, hypertension, those type of things. There's also been studies about vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D also is an important part of the immune system. And Black people tend to be deficient with that vitamin. And so that may be another reason why. But another important reason why is because of the lack of access to care, healthcare disparities. So if you're already disenfranchised or disadvantaged because you can't get regular checkups, you don't have a doctor to call to say, I'm sick. All you have is the emergency room. And, they would tell people to stay out of the emergency rooms. Yeah. So those things all were like a perfect ingredients to put into a perfect stew to just cause this kibosh, if you would, of just unfortunate incidents. And again, Black people were just disadvantaged when it came to that area. So with that said, now, if we look at behavioral health disparities, even in that area, before the pandemic, Blacks were not going to see mental health providers. And even if they did, many of them would not return back because they would not see people who looked like them. Or they were dealing with professionals who did not understand their plight. And so it's very interesting. And I remember very clearly when I was at the University of Illinois, a very quick story of a woman who came in to see me, and she had told her previous provider, who was Caucasian, who was white, that she was hearing God's voice, and the Lord was speaking to her. And she ended up being put on an antipsychotic medication that was causing her all type of detrimental side effects. And it broke my heart because I knew what she was talking about. She was a Christian. Yeah. So I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, God speaks to me. Looked at me like, really? And sure enough, I took her off the medication and everything was fine. But it just shows, that particular example just showed how we are a unique group of people who have been disadvantaged, disenfranchised because of our skin color. So real. And that should not be. So all these different areas put the Black man at a disadvantage. There are some other things too, but that's just kind of as a whole. But if you think about men, men are taught a certain way to act, to behave. They're taught not to show emotions. So you're talking about a man who is dealing with the stressors of life with this pandemic, the financial stressors that reel it in now to current events. If you lost your job, or if you had to maintain your job and had to go out and travel, even though the stay-at-home shelter was in place, but you were considered essential. So another stat was that only 19% of Blacks, from what I was told, were only able to work from home. 19%.
Wow.
Which meant the rest of them who were working had to go out. So how are they going to avoid catching the coronavirus when they have to go out to work? So these are just all the different things that, as a Black person, that again, you didn't even have any say in it.
Yeah.
That's the thing I really want to point out. These are the things that were just given to us before we even make certain decisions.
I don't know, Richard, do you have anything to add onto that?
Well, I would just say that, again, we are living in a system. Everyone is talking now about systemic racism, white supremacy, and all of the structural racist practices and policies that basically has caused the disparities, caused, the overrepresentation of all of the areas of development, educational development. We find that Black boys are overrepresented in school and special education classes. So it starts early. It seems like it never ends. We're overrepresented in the prison system. We only about 6 or 7 of the nation's population, but somewhere between 42 and 50% of the prison population.
Wow.
I was telling Jonathan last night that, Senator Cory Booker shared a stat the other day that was just astounding. He said that that 50+% of Black men, young men, are under the criminal justice supervision. There are more Black men under the criminal justice supervision than there were slaves, Black male slaves in 1850. So we find a lot of Black men who have been forced and or channeled into the prison system. We have conversations all the time about from the cradle to the to jail cells. That conversation is constantly on the news, and a lot of that again because we are just in a system where the pressures from without, forces from without, more or less move Black men into positions where they're unable to really thrive and survive and prosper. And when you basically have a system set up like that, again, we keep in mind that we're also in a system that use Black men as a threat to the survival of the system. And so Black men are demonized, criminalized, marginalized, and terrorized. And all those things are, in addition to what Jonathan shared, when you pile that on top of one another, and those are decades, centuries, doing that kind of harm to that demographic, Black men. We understand why the disparities are so great and why there's overrepresentation of Black men in all of these life evaluation. So Black men are devalued early, and that is, again, continues throughout the cycle. Black men, by the way, we're the demographic exception of maybe one whose life expectancy rates are the lowest. We don't live long because we are basically trying to do what? Trying to navigate a system that is hell-bent on keeping us down, our place. We have more time, we can get into some of the other areas, but I think that hopefully offers explanation as to addresses your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I appreciate both of your insights. And so when you kind of think about everything that you all have shared with, Richard, some of those, detrimental stats relative to Black men in prison, Jonathan, what you mentioned by just some of the socioeconomical pressures, and also, I guess, the lack of representation in terms of Black therapists and those and support systems for them. How are you finding that Black men are coping? Because that's a lot to manage. And I think about my friend from high school who he had shared recently that he was beaten in 2002 by police officers, and he never said anything to anyone. So just in terms of like holding on to that type of trauma, how are you finding Black men are coping and maintaining their mental well-being, or are they not?
Well, that's the question. And you just gave a perfect example of what's happening. We're internalizing.
Yeah.
Things are continuing to occur to us, and we're taught to suck it up and just to move forward. So we're internalizing. That's one of the main things. Addictions, addiction disorders, and many times when people hear me talk about addiction disorders, they talk about illicit substances. Yes, I am talking about that, but there's other addictions. Alcohol is not an illicit substance, but alcohol is legal in our country, and so that is a main one. Different types of cigarette smoking, marijuana smoking, sex addictions, pornography, even food. I mean, just there's so many different types of addictions. Yeah. Many people might say, "Well, they don't have eating disorders." That is false. That is, and so all these different things could play out in an addiction. Then abuse. Where you are seeing even present day, where there are the domestic violence or intimate partner violence, that's what it's called now. We're seeing more and more cases of that arising. So verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. So those are just some of the unhealthy coping mechanisms that we are seeing. And again, that's not everybody. I don't want to, say every Black man is doing it. That is by no means. But those are just some of the coping mechanisms that I'm having to help people to come out of. There are some healthy, ways, exercising that I know that men will do. And you don't necessarily have to be in a gym, just walking, meditation, prayer, and, being able to actually journal and write. There's some great authors. I mean, you're talking to one right there, Richard Rowe, so again, getting those things out, sports. So those are just some ways in which people are coping. So you have some unhealthy ways and you have some healthy ways.
Mm-hmm.
But also, Joyce, we're seeing, a lot of Black men who are not able to cope, and who are not able to figure this out. And how do you figure out all the layers of oppression and all the humanization and demonization of Black men? How do you really cope with it? And it's not easy, it's not difficult, it's very difficult. There's a powerful quote by the author Joy Neil Hurston. The quote goes something like this: if you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and make you think you enjoyed it. And so here we are, a lot of Black men who are silent. So a lot of Black men, in terms of coping, they are suffering in silence, and they are not bringing their pain to the forefront. We don't go and visit therapists. We are not doing the things that Jonathan just shared, meditating, sitting in the car sometimes when you feel like a heavy weight always on your back, and you are not perceived as being acceptable, not perceived to be, a human being. And so you question and you fall into this trap of not trusting, the different forms of support. And so we've got much work to do to try to convince Black men that their lives depend on their ability to let it out. Especially if early on in my life, I know that my parents were also great parents, but they did not spare the rod. So when I did something wrong, there was that kind of exacted against me and my siblings. So as a child, I really didn't know any better, and I just thought that was the norm. So we have a lot of that still going on. And then they also, to add insult to injury, Jonathan Boyd, also told me if I cried, my father especially, if you cry, I'm going to whip you some more. So again, those kinds of, and that's still going on today. So we've got to be very careful how we treat little boys, young boys, and hold on to that. And so when there's pain in the heart and there is a repression of the pain, it is hard to do what? It is hard to show your emotions, hard to basically let it out. And so that correlates or can lead to chronic depression, chronic stress, anxiety, all of those things. And if you're not treated, if you don't seek treatment, I told Jonathan the other day that one of my favorite movies, and I would hope that the audience basically will check it out at some point, it's called Antoine Fisher. And Antoine Fisher was a powerful story because he was always engaged, he was always perceived as being very, very angry. And that anger, ever-present anger, had not been addressed by anyone. But he was carrying it from his childhood, where it came from, and he was carrying it throughout his life. We've got to help men, especially Black men, especially, to seek therapy, to acknowledge their pain, and to no longer suffer in silence. And if we can more men do that, then we can save some lives, help men recover the level of managing their stress and basically lives.
No, and that's good. And so I want to pivot the conversation a bit in terms of some of the services that I know that the Baltimore Medical Health Alliance offers. I know, Jonathan, you had mentioned like the Emancipation Circle. So either one of you want to talk a bit about the services that you offer, because it's not just for residents within Maryland, but you all are doing some virtual work and others can tap into it. So I think it'd be great to kind of hear, but what are some viable solutions at this point?
Well, go ahead, Jonathan.
No, go ahead, Richard. I'm fine.
For example of some of the services, we basically teamed up with a national group called the Community Healing Network, which we develop these emotional emancipation circles. So these emotional emancipation circles are actually healing circles that provided safe spaces for our community to come and to share their trauma, to share their pain, to talk about, their life experiences, and to basically use rituals, cultural rituals, or the traditions to help address and to deal with some of the trauma and help heal, provide the healing spaces that allow for healing and for a release of the traumatic experiences that we all experience. So that was one example. We also connect individuals to culturally competent practitioners who can allow you have to find the right practitioner, right address some of the trauma and some of the hurt and pain that they can relate to. That's very important. We have services or referral services that also provide that kind of. And then there's all kinds of other networking with other grief counseling services that different programs in the city and across the country that provide that kind of help. So again, it's partnering with other organizations, providing consultation when possible, referrals, and then as often as possible, opportunities for safe places where we can come, talk, heal, feel confident that our confidential information, know that the information is going to stay within those circles. Those are just a few of the things.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, do you have anything you want to offer?
Well, I was going to make sure that people understand that Black Mental Health Alliance is not a direct care provider. It is one that provides education and consultation. We have been at the forefront of many battles here in the DMV area. I can just say, for instance, when the Freddie Gray uprising occurred, we were one of the leading organizations providing community forums and what we call to action spaces that allow people to come together. Let me just tell you, those call to actions blew me up real quick. It's something to stand before a whole bunch of angry people who are looking for answers. People are looking for answers as to why this happened, what can we do to change. And let me tell you though, the energy is different though. I will say this, I digress just a little bit. Yeah. The energy with George Floyd versus Freddie Gray, and I can sense it, I can feel it, I can see it in the representation of people out there. And so I am so hopeful. And what I mean by different, it's a good type of difference, where I'm seeing more and more people are coming together to say this will not be tolerated anymore. And I just pray it's not just lip service. But I'm feeling a different type of energy. I'm seeing a different group of people. But Black Mental Health Alliance has been on that front line, first line responder to make sure that, in particular, since we're talking about Black men, have those safe spaces. Richard did not mention, but he coordinates different symposiums just for Black men in this area to make sure that their needs are met. We do the same for Black women, but we, in particular, we reach out to Black men to make sure. That is so important. We have safe spaces where you can talk about what's happening. And not just outside, in the community. Those spaces should hopefully exist within your workplace. That's one of the things that, for those people who are on the line and you have control over different areas in your corporation or job or wherever it might be that you work, help create that safe space. Because one of the things that I understand as a Black man in medicine, I've had to learn how to be able to navigate those waters. When I go to a room and people say, oh, the bedpan is over there, I can be serious. With my white coat and stethoscope on. And again, that's a little bit of exaggeration, but let me tell you a very true story that happened in Chicago while I was on call on a late November night. I was on call, University of Illinois Medical Center, where I did my training. And I was walking back from the hospital to my car in the parking garage. And the police came beside me, shine the light, I think that's shone the light, whatever the verb is, on me. And so I thought I had a personal escort back to my car. Yeah, all right, good.
Not so much.
Do you know this man stopped me? He sit on the curb and said that I look like a person who's robbing vending machines. Again, I was dressed in my white coat, name, stethoscope, everything on me. And I just could not believe it. And when that happened to me, I was like, okay, who can I tell this to?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting. That's the point. Because I didn't want to keep it in and I didn't know who I can talk to, Joyce.
Right.
Yeah.
There was nobody there who I felt I could, who are my superiors that I talk to let them know. And so we have to do the same thing within our places of employment. There has to be safe spaces because a Black man will be sometimes blamed for being angry because he is passionate. I'm very passionate when I start speaking. I'm passionate about what I do. But they get blamed for being angry and passionate when all they're doing is just expressing themselves about what he thinks about. And so we have to be careful about what we do. And I realize what time we are, but let me just throw this in.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to also be able to say when we have wronged somebody, wronged a Black man, not somebody, let me just wronged a
right.
We have to be able to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was fighting mad, and I don't ever get to that point too much. Saturday morning, when I heard Roger Goodell's, Goodell, whatever the man's name is.
Goodell.
Yeah, there we go. And he gave this apology, sincere apology, I suppose, but Colin Kaepernick's name was not mentioned. Right. I was angry. You hear me? I'm still angry. I'm calmed down. But I told Joyce I had to go get the Bible, seriously. This is mine, said the Lord in Romans chapter 12. I had to sit there and read it. I read two versions, the King James version. Let that thing sink in, because I was like, how can you apologize and talk about people who are doing peaceful protests when the man who started it ago, and you can't say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Black men are dealing with that. We have been wronged. We've been falsely accused of murdering people. We've been put in jail for things that we should not have been put in. And they just say, oh, sorry, we had the wrong person. You're now free. No.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, you know, we have to be able to create a space so that that Black man can get those things out.
And so I'm curious, the both of you raised some excellent points regarding the topic. And I'm like, how do organizations, workplaces really create those spaces? Because the reality is, some leaders are just not inclusive leaders. Some leaders don't have that competency, and you would hope that they would. But the reality is some folks are just perhaps, that's not a natural muscle. So what are some things that leaders can begin to think about as it relates to creating that safe space, so that in your example, Jonathan, when that event happened to you in the parking lot, you would have known that, oh, I can go to so-and-so because they've created that atmosphere where I'm comfortable with having and sharing that type of moment with them. So what's one or two things that folks can consider doing?
Absolutely. I'll start off first real quick. Create an alliance. You know, I've been asked by certain law firms recently, and I've been noticing how they have created a Black alliance. How you can create sometimes, even if you remember back in college, how there were Black or minority group organizations that would help to foster certain relationships upon a university or upon a campus. You can do the same thing even within your corporation. But let me tell you, that's not enough. You want to make sure that you have trusted allies. You need to develop trusted allies. And I will share with Joyce, there is a checklist, and she'll distribute it tomorrow. But I got this from the Black Caucus website for the American Psychiatric Association. And it's just a checklist on how to recognize your allies within the workplace. And for those who are white, you can check yourself to see, are you an ally of color? See, the thing that I want to say, and I've gotten more emboldened, which is so interesting to me. I'm telling you, because if you'd asked me this last year, I probably would have been a little bit, you know, but this 2020 has just changed my thinking, truly, and I'm so glad about it. I'm more emboldened. It is not my job to educate white people about racism. Mm-hmm. It is not my job. The education is out there. The knowledge is out there. And it is my job to assist where people want to ask questions. But we have got to have some uncomfortable conversations about what it takes to become an ally and not just be lip service. Yeah. You know, let me say this. I feel bad for Senator Tim Scott, who is the Republican senator who now was put in charge. I believe that's his name. I wrote down his name, Tim Scott. Senator Tim Scott, the only Black Republican senator in the U.S. Congress right now. Mm-hmm. I feel bad for him. Why do I feel bad for him? Because it was like the Republicans said, okay, go ahead, you deal with this issue. Mm-hmm. No, that's not right. They should have put someone of the majority race over that, because truthfully, it's not the Black people's. How is it that we're going to fix a problem that we did not create?
and
Go ahead,
Joyce and Jonathan. No, I mean, again, we have to demand from these environments, these organizations, we have to demand more diversity, more equity. Yeah. And we have to basically, help them, if necessary, figure that out. Not basically carry them to the fountain, to the water hole, but we've got to say to them, look around, look at your staffing. If in 2020 your staffing is basically still lily white or all white with very few Blacks, that is a serious problem in 2020. And so you start by looking at your workplace environment. And you also look at, levels of the hierarchy. Are there any supervisors? Are there any board members? You got to look at the entire workplace environment, from the staffing to board members to the vision of services to minority vendors or Black vendors. All of those things come into play. if in fact you are going to be true to your claim that you really want to basically do what? You want to provide fair and just environment. You want to mete out justice. You want all your employees to feel safe. You want all your employees to feel like they have a place to come to when there are issues and problems. And so those are some of the concrete things that I think every workplace environment can do, and that also any public environment. So again, we got to ask everyone to take this hard look at themselves and see what they are doing or not doing in order to elevate the conversation and also move everyone to a place where we can stop talking about these issues. This is what we've been doing a lot. We shed a few tears, but it's easier to shed tears than to really change the system.
Yes.
Really address the system. Everybody can have that moment where they can shed tears, but when we're now talking about how do we really dismantle these racist structures and these racist environments, that's going to take the real work, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of leaning in by everybody. Jonathan is right. Don't ask those that have been oppressed or left out to now do what? Solve the problems that you have created. It's added stress. And that's what I'm quite sure a lot of Black folks are experiencing right now. What can we do? What can we do? Well, you can first look in the mirror at yourself and see if you are basically practicing racist, or you are basically guilty of practicing racist kinds of practices and so forth. So all those kinds of things now coming front and center. Everybody has responsibility. Everybody should be held accountable. And that's the other thing. Accountability is critical. So end of your, if it's an annual report or an annual assessment of where you are in year one with regards to these issues, you need to be able to demonstrate evidence that have done some things that really have allowed for the kinds of things that we're talking about in this discussion this evening. You should be able to evidence, have we moved the needle with regards to staffing, equity, distribution of all these things that are critical for letting people know that you are serious about really making change within your organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But we're going to take a few questions because I see questions coming through the chat, but I wholeheartedly agree with you all by way of the accountability, right? That must happen at the top of the organization. And I do agree with your point earlier, Jonathan, that with the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, this does feel a lot different in terms of the amount of activity, the amount of, I see more people being vocal in terms of maybe their CEO issued a statement, but people are saying that statement's not enough. Let's look at the numbers, to Richard's point, relative to the makeup of your organization. So I think it's a balancing act between, some organizations will use the terminology organizational readiness, but in my mind, a lot of it's willingness. This is not rocket science, this is not physics. You can hire, you can develop, you can promote Black people. It is not that hard. But then you also have to create the culture where once they ascend to those roles, are they supported? You cannot silence them once they get to the position because of, whether it's the Black masculinity, whether it's, communication styles being different. The culture has to support the person in being successful. And Jonathan, you said a very good point about having allies within the organization to kind of help navigate some of that. So I think I wholeheartedly agree with all those comments. And so I see several questions. So if you all have questions, continue to put them into the chat. The first question, I'm going to ask it. Okay, I'm going to read it verbatim. I think of young people witnessing violence in their neighborhoods or families. Are they experiencing PTSD? Do you think lack of access to mental health for them to deal with their experiences also contributes to this cycle of trauma? So neighborhood trauma, family trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. The short answer to that question is yes. You don't have to go to war in order to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. And I mean by going to war, go to battle, because there's wars that are fought within our own communities. There are battles that are fought within our own communities. And so some of our communities, they are war zones. I'll just give a brief example. During the Freddie Gray uprising, I was connected to the Johns Hopkins Day Hospital. I wasn't working at Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins then. I was at my current location. But I was talking with a day hospital driver who transports the youth back and forth to the day hospital, back to their community. And the community is where the uprising was occurring, around Winchester. And so the driver was scared to go back to that neighborhood that day when the uprising was going on. The children said, "What's wrong with you? We see this every day. Come on, let's go."
Wow. It's their reality.
Right.
It's reality.
It's their reality.
And what this does, this trauma does, it desensitizes you. And so you have to be aware of that. And the thing about trauma, when you're experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, is that at the least time that you expect it, it will rise back up. And it causes irritability that you don't even realize why you're irritable. A certain smell can just trigger it. And it'll take you back to where you were assaulted, back to that trauma, back to that injury, back to that death threat that I talked about at the very beginning of that definition of trauma. And so we have to be aware that even we could be traumatized by continuing to watch certain things on TV. Yeah. I have learned how to turn my TV off while again, I think my TV was on maybe 30 minutes this morning as I was watching a little bit of the news, and that was it. While I was home, I don't turn the TV on because it's too much. Right? It's too much sensory overload. I got my phone going off, I got my iPad going off, I got the TV going off. Yeah. So yes, the children are traumatized, but there is help for them. If you realize that, let me just end with hope. You know, that's why I'm in this field. That's why I'm doing this. We can bring them out. We can provide the help that they need.
Good. Another question came through in terms of an individual is joining us from Toronto, so welcome and thank you. They want to know, are the services offered by Black Mental Health Alliance, are they international? Do you have international capabilities?
We can offer referrals sometimes. There's different places, but we are not international on the level that at some point we move forward. I know Jonathan says yes as board chairperson, you know, but we have relationships around the world. Jonathan, if you want to add to that, but I mean that's where we're headed. We're headed to basically firming up our reach, not only locally but regionally, nationally, and internationally. Callers from all over the place. And that's where we want to end up. We've been around for a number of years, and we think that we're doing great work. And so we really know that this is a moment too where there's going to be a real need for more mental health services, organizations like ours. I recently heard that depression medicine, they're running out of depression medicine in certain around the country because a lot of folks are feeling the isolation and feeling the need to basically, and not being able to figure this out, not being able to navigate through these very, very pandemics that we are up against right now. So stress is going to go up. Suicide rates are also on the increase. So we've got to basically be about the business of expanding our reach. Jonathan stated we have access to some of the best clinicians and practitioners, and so we really want for our folks to take advantage of it.
So the person in Toronto, you know, you could be our new chapter member. Always recruiting, so look us up, all right?
Shameless plug. Another question, now this one, I think this is a loaded one. So can you speak to the internal conflict of the Black male executive / influencer and the challenge of saving the future by saving face versus saving the future by speaking out? And he went on to say that he's even seen in organizations where there is diversity at even the highest level of the organization. So I guess in terms of when and where do you decide to advocate? I mean, because it's a balancing act, right? In terms of you want to champion the work, but then you also need to keep a job. And, you know, it's a thin line. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, quickly, I'll share with you that, you know, I can't remember his name, but the president of Kaiser Permanente was a Black man who unfortunately,
correct?
Right. Unfortunately, he transitioned, he passed away at a very young age, and I'm certain that the stress of trying to address the question that has popped up on the screen was evident. And so there's always this, and I call it the double consciousness paradigm that Dr. Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, spoke about, this inability to reconcile this strivings to be the corporate leader or an American and also a Black American, unable to really reconcile those two strivings, and they can contribute to mental illness and mental conflict. Certain that to really address this issue, I mean, that the executive has to basically figure out, in my estimation, what's most important. You know, the money issue is always and the code or the culture of the organization is always important. But ultimately, its allegiance is to whom? And that is a question that we all have ourselves. Ultimately, where is our allegiance? And are we in this only to basically save ourselves as an individual, or are we committed to helping and offering our services to many folks? Jonathan, you have a
you know,
that?
it really is an internal struggle. I'm very familiar. We mentioned the CEO of Kaiser. You know, he was actually grew up in the Church of God in Christ, and he was a man of faith. And I heard him speak about 2 years before he spoke at one of the Kojic events. Excellent. But let me tell you this: that in medicine, in a position where I sit as chief medical director, it is a balancing act. And one of the things that you have to learn how to do is speak when it's time to speak, and learn sometimes it's not even worth the battle. And that's difficult, especially if you're always fighting. One thing about Black people is that we're ready for the fight. Many of us are ready for the fight, but we just need to figure out when is the best time to fight. And we have to be strategic thinkers. That's one of the things I can learn, or that I can say I learned as being a medical director, is that I have to learn when to say something and when to make that right move. And sometimes it just requires just a little bit of patience. The opportunity many times will come back around, or it will present itself again. But it definitely is an internal struggle. Let me tell you, one of the things that I also realized too as a Black man is that when I go into board meetings, or when I go into many meetings that I've called or have been called into, I know what we're going to talk about. I'm not caught off guard too much. And so and many times that is just because I have developed allies again. I go back to that. I want to know, what is the purpose of us coming together? What is the purpose of why we're meeting? And so let me tell you, it is a difficult struggle, and it's real. And I don't have necessarily a clear answer for you. And it probably is not a clear answer, but it's just one of those that you have to navigate, and one that you have to appreciate and learn how to take care of yourself so that that stress doesn't overwhelm you as you're dealing with that internal struggle.
Yeah, and I'll add to what the both of you all are saying without jumping ahead. That is a very real question, and something that comes up, you know, in my experience in corporate America. And we're actually going to talk about Black men in corporate America in session 3 later this month. And that's really going to be where we're going to have a couple of diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, as well as some senior male executives who can offer that perspective. Because I do believe it's like you have to pull different levers at different times. And then also depend upon where you're at within the organization, you can have a louder voice because you have, you hate to say you've earned it, but you are in a position where you're able to manage things a little bit more vocally. So that's an excellent question, and we will certainly spend more time on that. I see a final question that's come in. In regards to reparations, how would you like to see mental health institutions be engaged in the healing of Black men?
I think that's another great question. You know, that is, you know, one of my favorite authors. He's a best-selling author. His name was Randall Robinson. Randall Robinson, familiar to some of you all, but and this is a perfect segment for bringing him into the discussion. He wrote a powerful book back in 2001 called Quitting America. Here is a Black man who basically had fought the battles in America all of his life. He simply reached the point where he had enough. One of his best books, of course, was called The Debt. The Debt is a book that's all about reparations. So there is a need for a conversation about reparations and what that means. Repayment, repair. How do you repair it? People who had to endure centuries, every century, basically working all their lives and not being compensated for their work. So if those reparations ever become realized, and that's something that we need more discussions about and work on, if that become realized, then there will be sufficient or more funds for folks to create more life-saving, life-affirming institutions that can lead to ongoing healing of Black men. But it also says to the world that, you know, Black people are human beings. Black men are human beings and worthy and deserving of being compensated, not only financially, but psychologically and emotionally. All of that is tied into this conversation around reparations. I would love to keep the reparations issue at the top of the list of things to discuss that will ultimately lead to both emotional, psychological, physical healing for Black men.
I'll just say this. In order to have true atonement means you have reconciliation and reparations. You cannot, an atonement means forgiveness. So if we're talking about healing, forgiveness, then you have to be able to have reconciliation, which is what many people are trying to do. But true forgiveness does include reparations. And so, you know, if you even look at the Christian principle, you know, if you go how Jesus died for our sins, then in order for that to happen, there had to be reconciliation and there had to be reparations. So true atonement requires those two things. I know many people don't want to deal with reparations, but they are necessary.
Excellent. So I guess in terms of just some final thoughts, because I want to be respectful of time, but if you all are interested in supporting the Black Mental Health Alliance, we're going to put up the GoFundMe as well as the PayPal information because of all the amazing work that this association is doing. We want to make sure, and again, being an ally means taking action. So this is one way for individuals who are interested in being allies in the work to actually take action. So if we can include, Joan, if you can put up the payment information, thank you so much, as well as the website so you all can learn more about the Black Mental Health Alliance. So some key takeaways. Hopefully everyone got a lot out of the conversation. Really appreciate Dr. Shepard and Richard for your candor, your honesty, your expertise. I'm hopeful that this is not going to be the first and only time that we're working together. Hopefully it'll be on other solutions and things that we can actually do. But one thing that I think was really a couple key takeaways was all about acknowledging and getting the help that you need. So in terms of Black men, proactively getting the help that you need, and it could be some of the services offered by the Alliance by way of the emancipation circles. And I love that concept because it's a safe place for Black men to connect with other Black men in a safe environment. So that is one avenue. In terms of allies, as Jonathan mentioned, I will be sending out tomorrow the checklist. So in terms of being able to check if I'm an ally, to check to ensure that I am living up to the responsibilities of what allyship looks and feels like. That's one way to do that as well. But again, so appreciate you all for connecting. Again, this was recorded and I will be posting this on our website, on my website in the next week or so you can be on the lookout for that. So again, thanks so much for your attentiveness and for joining the conversation tonight. You all have a great evening.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Take care, everybody.